Okay, let's jump in. So some of the pain points about manual deployments, we've all been there. We've all do it. Most people, I think, probably still do it this way. But some of the pain points for manual deployments is mainly zipping up plugins and themes. Then you're FTPing. I know she'd SFTP, but I know a lot of people still FTP using FileZilla. So you're copying that maybe from your local machine up to a staging server or development server, some people call them, and then going into the file system somewhere and then unzipping all the files. It's a bit slow, it's a bit clunky as well, and some staging development servers or some web hosts, yes, they have a one-click create a development staging server, but they usually clone it into a subfolder of the actual live website. I tend to find. So if you're FTPing up and down and unzipping, then there's a possibility you might not click in the staging folder and do it on live. I've certainly experienced that a few times. So overwriting the wrong directory, staging live, that's a bit risky doing that, especially with live clients. Staging often lags behind live because updating it's a bit of a pain. So and client feedback might just be a quick tweak. So you might be on the phone, on a Zoom call with them, chatting away, and they say, no, what that button, different color, or these two sections twisted around. Now, you yourself, that's like a 1 minute change in the code of the CSS. But if you're having to FTP up and upload zips and unzip, then it's not a good experience for the client, and they've got to wait 10, 15 minutes, or you're writing it all down and doing it all afterwards. So manual deployments, not as good. As freelancers, even we can't, sometimes we don't own the push to production as well. Sometimes that's in the client's domain, so we can only do push to staging, push to dev, and then let them do the review and push to development as well. But the reality is manually packaging and shipping code, whether it's a theme or a plugin, it tends to, eat hours over the whole project's lifetime. And every manual step, again, is a chance for a human error to do that. So automation fixes, not all of it, but most of it. So instead of wasting time zipping, uploading, and hoping nothing breaks, you look a little bit more professional by keeping your staging site automatically updated. And clients get to see a developer or freelancer who's more organized, more reliable, and a bit easier to work with. So in this context tonight, we're going to be talking about updating from the local up to a staging site. So we'll not include the production because that can be, sometimes not within our 100% control. So CI and CD are acronyms in this space. So CI means continuous integration, and CD means continuous delivery. And the idea is that when you're updating your code and then you're pushing it up to your whatever branch is, that it can then automatically deploy on the end system, and you basically just keep going. So it's really good for working with teams. You can use it solo as well, but working with teams, it makes things a lot quicker because that deployment part, where you're normally zipping and unzipping and FTPing, it gets rid of that completely, which is great. So every time code changes, automated system handles the kind of boring but important steps. So that might not just be replacing files. It could be building stuff. It could be compiling CSS to CSS. You could be deploying, you could be running linters, all that sort of stuff. So it's really a lot of the stuff that you would do repetition on each build and each commit. You can get these automated things doing for you. So it's a big time saver. I kind of relate it a little bit to the factory line production. So you kind of get consistent results all the time. And one of the good things as well is that once you've got it set up, it's kind of there. So you'll know yourself, sometimes clients kind of disappear for a couple of months, or maybe you're working with a not-for-profit or a government when they've got to go through all the red tape before you get the next phase of the website. So it might be 6 months, even a year down the line, and you want to come back to the same production system, development, production, and deployment system. If you've got it all there and running, it's great. If you don't, you kind of got to go back and say, how did I do that? How did I deliver? And where are all the things needed for this project? So we're focusing a bit on GitHub Actions today. I know there's other different repositories, and I'll touch on maybe one of them later on. But let's talk about what GitHub Actions really are. They're event-driven automation. So when you do something, then it does something in response. So GitHub Actions, it's an automation tool that reacts to your events in the repository. So we're running branches and repos. So for example, an event could be pushing some new code to a particular branch, or opening a pull request, or even running a schedule like every night at midnight. So it's repetition and actions. The difference versus manual FTP workflow, well, traditionally, I think a lot of freelancers have said, still finish coding locally, FTP up to staging, unzip, cross the fingers. That's kind of pull-based, where you decide when to ship the files. Whereas actions are more push-based. So the moment you push or do something with your repo, then that's when GitHub spins up. It runs a server, checks your code, it runs through the workflow that you've defined, and then delivers the output for that. So it's a bit more of a refined, more professional way of running things, I think. What actually runs? Workflows are YAML language, YAML. So they're files that you keep in your repo. They're plain text, almost kind of JSON style when you look at them or when you write them. And they describe the jobs and the workflow in the jobs and the steps you have in that particular run cycle. So one step might be check out code. So you might want to check out from a particular branch. Another might be run a linter, and probably the last one, the step might be to deploy via SFTP. And so think of it a little bit of a to-do list. So GitHub executes that in the order, in the same way every time. And you can run things in parallel, but I think for most WordPress projects, you probably want to run things, in async mode, just to make sure that one thing's done and everything is run in the correct order. There's a huge marketplace, specifically on GitHub, for usable actions. So if you're new to this and looking to get into it, you don't have to, read thousands of tutorials and build all these workflows yourself. Most of the decent ones, most of the ones that people use in everyday kind of small projects, WordPress projects, they're already pre-built. So you just need to have a look through the marketplace, see one that fits your 90, 80% workflow, copy it, and then just adjust it a little bit. So the GitHub community, it's really good. It's got thousands and thousands of pre-built actions, more action you can shake a stick at, that you can drop into your workflow. So things like the SFTP deploy, you can do Slack notifications as well. If you're doing a plugin or a theme, then you can run the PHP code sniffer, things like that automatically, just to check all your code is running properly and is spaced and linted properly. So it's heaps of actions, lots of actions. So you're not basically writing scripts from scratch. You basically assemble a bit like Lego pieces into your own workflow. And the benefit for freelancers is very much the power of consistency. Instead of remembering the steps and copying from old notes and things from old projects or adapting stuff, you basically set up the recipe once in GitHub and it repeats it perfectly every time, no brainer. So this process means fewer mistakes, fewer human mistakes, faster updates as well for development teams, and more trust with your client. I've used it probably for about 4 or 5 years now, maybe not specifically GitHub, but other ones as well. And it really does help, especially when you're on the call to a review team, an internal review team. As again, if they're talking about things back and forward, you can update stuff pretty much in real time, and it just saves you having to go, all right, okay, take all these notes, and then, okay, right, well, let's arrange another meeting next week or whatever. And I've also had clients where, the internal IT team, they're busy, they're doing stuff, and they just can't schedule a meeting every 2 or 3 days to keep up with your development stuff that might only take a few minutes to update. So quite a lot of positives for using GitHub Actions into your workflow. Why this matters for WordPress? Now, freelancers juggle many client websites at the same time. I've done that in the past. I'll try not to. I try and space them out, but inevitably, you're probably going to be running 2, 3, even before client websites at a particular time at different stages as well. So you might have one that you're finishing off. You might have one that you're kind of in the middle of, and you might have one that you're onboarding clients and doing kind of wireframes at the beginning of the project. So the freelancer's life is juggling lots of clients and sites. And you may be coming back, as I said before, you might be coming back to another project after maybe a month's update, maybe 2 or 3 months. And can you replicate the same testing and delivery to be consistent from what you've been doing in the past without using Gitflow workflows? So deployment errors, they do hurt trust. And as I say, they waste time as well, especially for small changes that you can just do there and then on the client call, and it makes you look like a super person as well. But automation, it's often seen as a kind of enterprisey thing. So I've talked about this in previous WordPress meetups. I've got solo freelancers, web designers, people like that, and they're like, but all this automation, it's all for like big clients with enterprise or big orgs and things like that. But it's not really. It's for smaller freelancers. Even if you're saving 15, 30 minutes per deploy, it all adds up really, really quickly. And if you're a freelancer, then time is your money basically. So I think this works well for small freelancers. Clients love it and they love the professionalism, and freelancers get back a lot of extra time for those. So here is the basic anatomy of a workflow. They're super simple. I mean, it can be complicated, but you want to try and keep them super simple. Cameron says, probably saves me 25 hours a month on maintenance. Yeah, all adds up. All adds up. Here's the basic building blocks. So a workflow is the whole automation, what they call recipe, from start to beginning. And a workflow consists of jobs, like run test, deploy and staging. And jobs can be run in parallel, or they can be run in sequence. I tend to run most of mine in sequence. I probably do have a use case for parallel ones, but generally my workflows are one big long list. Each job has steps, like a specific task. So check out the repo, sync files with SFTP, and things like that. Right at the top, we've got the trigger, and that's the event. It's usually on something called a push. Just wait to someone. Go. Which is usually on a push to a branch. It can be on a commit or any of the GitHub events that support, but usually when you're starting out, it's on a push event. That means every time I push up to a branch, then these jobs run this workflow that I've defined. So again, there's lots of other things that you can trigger on pull requests, for example. You can trigger on a scheduled time as well, or just manually. But push is probably the freelancer's bread and butter here. So metaphor, think of it like a restaurant. So the trigger is the waiter taking an order. The workflow is the kitchen working to handle that order. And each job is, of course, like an entree or main or dessert. And the steps are the ingredients and the cooking instructions that the chef uses. So every time the order comes in, the kitchen repeats that same steps and delivers the same output, which is a nice dinner for every time. That's the best metaphor I can come up with. I'm sure there's others. The freelancer context. So instead of zipping up the plugin, using FTP or cPanel, unzip, check it, and then email the client and say, hey, that's up there. Then you define the steps once in a YAML file, and GitHub does all that every time that you push. So that's the power, consistency, and no forgotten steps. Okay, so YAML, you might be new to YAML, you might not have heard of it before, but they're really, really simple to create, and they're simple for humans to read as well, which is a bonus. So here's probably the smallest type of workflow that I could think of. It runs when you, just look at me, a bit chopped off the top, sorry about that. It's useful for when you push to your main branch. So this one at the top, it's on push to a branch called main. So step one, it checks out your repo. So GitHub Actions have access to your plugin files. You want to make sure that you're checking out, especially if you're running on multiple teams, because other people could make updates. So don't just assume that the branch that you're deploying to is up to date. Make sure that you're pulling the correct branch out before you update stuff. This one here is plugin files. So it's checking out a plugin file. Step two, it uses a pre-built action to connect via SFTP and deploy those files to your staging server. And that's probably just enough, a really, really small workflow, but enough to keep a WordPress plugin or theme synced automatically with that staging or development server. So every push you make is deployed without you having to zip or FTP manually or anything like that. So really, really simple. Start small, and then you can build upon that workflow. Once you've got that running, then you can bring in linters and code sniffers and all that sort of stuff. But that's kind of the very basic workflow that most WordPress freelancers would want to start with when you're looking at this automation. The key takeaway here is CI, CD. It doesn't need to be a huge pipeline or a complex step. Even a few lines of config can save you kind of repeatable error-free deployments in time as well. And that's the key thing for freelancers. Cameron says, unlike reptiles, YAMLs don't own links. Nice. So freelancer hosting, reality. This is the world that we live in. Most clients have budget hosting. So let's be honest, they probably aren't running shiny DevOps setups. They're on shared plans with cPanel because it's cheap and ShareFlow just works. It just works. That's the kind of world that freelancers live in mostly. FTP, I was going to say SFTP is a normal. FTP is probably normal. So while big agencies are deploying with Git hooks and automations and everything we've just talked about, Docker containers, Kubernetes, most freelancers are still logging in with file server and pushing the stuff up over FTP, or they might have evolved to secure FTP. And it's not wrong. Well, FTP maybe is, but it's just the level that most people are working at. It's an easy thing to slip into. When you're talking about GitHub Actions and automation, CI/CD, it's like, it can be a bit of an overkill, a bit of a brain fart to try and get into. So this is kind of where people normally slip into. So the CI/CD myth, there's a perception, again, that continuous integration, continuous development, it belongs in these enterprise environments. There's a myth that's too complicated, it's too heavy for small sites. I think, as we've seen before, it's not really, it's easy. But actually, these principles apply perfectly in the cPanel world. So instead of dragging your stuff up manually, GitHub Actions can just connect the SFTP and handle that transfer automatically. So even for the GoDaddies, the SiteGrounds, that sort of stuff, this still works. It still works as long as you set it up, take time to set it up. The key takeaway here is that CI and CD isn't about having a fancy infrastructure. It's about consistency, repeatability, and automation. So whatever hosting you're on, it doesn't matter. You can still save yourself hours by letting GitHub Actions handle this kind of boring, error-prone, repeatable bits of your development cycle. Secrets. So we're talking mostly about transferring stuff up to a staging site, which means logging in. This is, we don't want to be storing our secrets in text files or config files, WordPress stuff, none of that. GitHub handles this. It's called secret management. The worst mistake you can probably make in this type of workflow is hard code all your credentials into YAML files. I've seen it before. That YAML file is in your repo forever. And if your repo ever goes public or you give access to somebody, then you're basically leaked all your server information to those people. So we don't want to do that. So imagine your SFTP and password right there in the workflow file. Anyone can access that repo, they can see it. Search engines can even index it as well. It's basically an open invitation to attackers, so please don't do that. So how GitHub handles it? So instead, GitHub, they have what's called a built-in vault for secrets. So you store the SFTP server with the username, the password, the server name, the username, the password with the port number as well as secret strings in the repo server. And there's an example there of a name called secret_token. And in your workflow, you pass them in using a dollar and two curly braces with the secret token in there. So secret dot and whatever token name. And when GitHub is running those automations, they'll pull in those as variables securely. So you don't have to bother about all that. So types of secrets you might store, again, for freelancers, the common ones are going to be the SFTP, using its password, server name. But if you're doing a little bit more fancier, you might want to store with SSH private keys, so you can log directly into the server using that way. If you're in a more complicated system, you might want to store API tokens, things like MailChimp or Stripe, if you're automating that sort of stuff, just to do a test for that. So anything that's secret and that you don't want people to see, then you can use this secrets management dashboard from GitHub. Best practice, secret management it's not optional, I would say. It's a difference between looking like a cowboy developer and looking like someone who takes client security really seriously. So even if you are the only person in the repo, it protects you from your future self forgetting credentials and things like that. Again, as you know, being a freelancer, you can come back to a project 6-8 months later, and it's not stuff written down, and you look a bit of a fool if you're asking the client for, what's the server login again? So use these GitHub vaults. They are your best friend when you're storing secret information. Okay, so setting up deployment. Step one, you want to create a repository. So if your project isn't already in GitHub, start by using one. For freelancers, it often means dropping in your theme, your plugin, or your child theme code. It becomes a kind of source of truth. So no more random zips scattered across your desktop. I went to revisit a project, probably about 4 or 5 year old project, and I had zip files of the theme version 1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.3.1. It's like, nightmare. In fact, that was a 10-year-old project. So step 2 is add your workflow file. So inside the repo, you want to create your .github /workflow folder, for example, or it could be /WordPress proj. Inside that, you want to create your YAML file, something like deploy.yml for YAML. And this file tells GitHub what you want to do whenever you land on that event. It's a commit or a push or whatever you're doing. Even the simplest workflow like checkout and SFTP deploy, can save you complete hours. So step 1, create your repo. Step 2, add your YAML file, your automation list. Step 3 is add the server credentials and secrets so that you can SFTP into there. You'll usually need at least a minimum host, username and password, and port number as well if it's a fancy server. And this just keeps your credentials and code safe and secure. So it's a non-negotiable, as I said before. And then step 4 is to push your code. Now, just commit and push to the branch, and you set your workflow up. Usually you have different branches for different features and stuff, but you could, I guess, just work off the main, the main. I won't say branch here, but usually what I tend to do is I have 2 or 3 different branches that I check out and just do some things, update, and then merge them into the main one, or a deployment branch as well, or a staging branch if it's just going to the staging server. So again, GitHub Actions, it spins up your runner, it executes your workflow and deploys all that stuff automatically on the server, which is what we want. And the payoff, from then on, you never need to repeat these manual steps, which is great. Every push is clean, it's a consistent deployment. The only hard part really is setting up that first time. And you'll reuse that setup again and again across different projects, especially if it's a nice, simple workflow. So yes, probably the first 50 minutes might feel a bit fiddly when you start here, but after that, you brought back hours and hours for your future time. So that's a +1 thumbs up. So let me share a real-world scenario from my work with a non-profit. I was building a custom plugin for them. It handled some pretty sensitive data, so everything had to go through the compliance review before it could ever even touch the live site. They had an internal IT dev team, smart people, but they're not particularly in the WordPress area, not specialists in WordPress. So it's my role to be the WP expert and get the changes out onto the staging server so they could then test and review that, and then they controlled production. So it was up to them to deploy however they deployed it to the live servers. So the old way, so before automation, how did you find them initially, Stephs? They reached out to me actually through a friend. Somebody said I knew WordPress, they had WordPress and were having problems because they didn't have that expertise in house. So yeah, they reached out to me, and the project was taken up. So the old way before automation, everything update meant zipping the plugin, uploading it manually into a staging subfolder, unzipping, and then emailing the team to say, yeah, version 1.2.7a, can you test it? So the IT team, they weren't at my beck and call, so time was really, really critical. I had them for about a 13-minute review window sprint, and there's no way I can use that time effectively by kind of zipping and uploading and unzipping. Plus, it's like to cause human errors if you're trying to rush things. So it sounds small, but over the project timeline, like Cameron mentioned in the chat, it saves so many hours of wasted time. And there was always confusion as well. Did staging actually have the latest version? Did I miss a zip file? Were they even testing the right build? That sort of stuff. Moving to the automation, sets all that stuff in motion. So the new way, of course, is what I've been talking about with GitHub Actions. The workflow changed completely. Now, the moment I pushed the code to it wasn't the main, it was a dev branch that I had. Then there's no version mismatch. It just automatically deploys on that particular server that we were using for the dev testing. And it meant the internal team, they always had the latest build to review. No delays, no manual packaging, no moving things around, which was great for them. Plus I could deploy fixes, as I said, on the review, in the review, 30-minute review sprint, I could just change and it deploy and could see it straight away. And they absolutely loved that. And then they could run their compliance checks and give feedback really, really quickly. So while I got my evenings back as well, instead of having to babysit zip files and FTP windows and all that horror. So the payoff for me was definitely saved hours of admin over the lifetime of the project. For them, it built confidence. That workflow really worked for them. And they knew that staging was always current and secure. They could go to that, and that's exactly what it was. And that's really the heart of continuous integration and continuous development. It really matters for freelancers, I think. It's not just about saving your own time. It's about building trust with the client. Clients see a professional, consistent process instead of a kind of messy manual upload, kind of finger in the air. And just off that one client, I've had hundreds of projects and many dollars in revenue because they trust that way of working. Okay, so adding pre-deploy tasks. So why bother with pre-deploy? So these are additional things you can add to your workflow. Once you've got that kind of basic deployment working, then you can add little guardrails before your code even touches the staging server. So think of it like doing a little kind of safety check before you take the car out. Are the tires inflated? I've got your washer fluid topped up, you got your seatbelt on, brake off, all that sort of stuff. But it's not about overcomplicating things. It's about catching silly mistakes early and showing the clients that you're being thorough in your process. So some examples that make sense for WordPress freelancers: linting PHP or running a code sniffer. So instead of waiting for the staging site to blow up with a syntax error, GitHub Actions can run a PHP linter or WordPress coding standards check, for example, first. And if it fails, the deployment doesn't even happen. It kind of stops in that area. So the client's not seeing the bad code. It's you that's seeing that that's failed, and then you have a chance to fix it and run the whole process again. And it really does save you embarrassment, and it gives the clients that kind of confidence that you're not pushing sloppy code. Other things you might want to do, and this is handy, is you can run WPCLI commands really, really easy. So you can run a WPCLI backup command. You can export the database before any changes when your branch is deployed. So if something goes wrong, you've got kind of fresh copy of the database, at the very least, to kind of roll back. And you can extend that to plugins, that particular plugin or theme folder that you're working on as well. Minify and compile assets is really popular. So if you've got Sass running or JS or just big CSS files, then you can run a step to compile them into .min files and then ship that as a production. And that way the staging site and maybe, later production always gets the optimized versions. Now, what I tend to do is I don't compile .min stuff for the staging development servers, just so the kind of internal IT team kind of look through it properly. There's no way they'll be able to look through that whole kind of compressed stuff. But definitely for your production push if you're in control of that. Freelancer context. So even if you're a solo freelancer, just adding one or two of these can make you stand out. Clients see you've got a thorough quality and safety check, and it's not just rushing changes out to live or even development. Steph's asking in chat, can we run a static version of a static WP content site this way? GitHub pages. Don't know. I've not tried that. You'd have to run and compile all the PHP stuff, so there might be a way, but that's static stuff's not something that I've used, Steph. And Cameron said, yes, although if it's with GitHub page, you won't need to deploy once it's pushed up on the repo, then GitHub will say, okay, obviously Cameron's got some experience in doing that static stuff. Some common gotchas, large media libraries. So when WordPress sites are often full of giant media folders, people upload them straight from their iPhone, which I absolutely hate. Thousands of images, videos, PDFs, you name it. You don't want your workflow pushing all these around on every deploy. It'll slow things down, it'll crawl, the website will crawl, and it'll risk kind of overwriting content that clients have already added directly to production or even the staging site to test. So the best practice is keep your deployments focused on code, sync media separately somehow, either with a plugin or a CDN or kind of one-time copy when you're setting up the staging or development site. Databases, let's talk about databases. There's the classic WordPress pain, is that your clients add posts, users, orders, everything to the live site when you're in the kind of development phase. If you overwrite the live DB or even staging DB with stuff, those changes obviously vanish. Now, CI and CD doesn't solve that. There's no good workflow with WordPress to synchronize the database between production, between staging. People have tried that, and it's just too much of a technical difficulty. And the reason is just the way that MySQL MariaDB works in assigning IDs to things, and there's no log or kind of roll forward, roll back type thing. So databases can't be synchronized, which is unfortunate. So we're just really talking about the code in CI/CD, and we need to kind of separate the databases, deal with them separately. So the solution is kind of workflow discipline. Code goes through CI/CD, content stays in the DB. If you need to copy staging to live, do it carefully, and usually only once during the project start or in different sprints. You've delivered to the production server, then to recopy that into staging. Just make sure you're doing it carefully. Probably an update freeze if your project's a small one. It's probably going to be your best friend. To say to the client, like, here's how WordPress works. If you can, let's pause the live site for updates. And then push the new version out. I know that's not always possible, and this is the pain with the WordPress database. Is it's not a nice clean deployment, but that's what we have. So we have to put in workarounds for the database. Hosting quirks. So shared hosting can throw curveballs. Some hosts block SSH ports for whatever reason. If you're on cheaper plans, and it's probably got some sort of throttling. So if you're doing a lot of commits all the time, it might go, hey, you've used up your quota for this particular month. So yeah, just watch out for these little things. File permission rules as well. There's still a lot of hosts out there that stamp 777 on everything. It's like, or even less. So have a think about those hosting quirks. If that's coming up, then you might need a little bit of trial and error, just how you tweak those deployment actions or get in contact with the support team. But keep your workflows flexible enough to handle those quirks if you do come across them. And again, the key takeaway here is CI/CD is powerful, but it's not magic. What's that? Magic. It won't fix messy hosting setups. It won't merge databases for you. So know these traps, know these issues, and plan your workflow around those, and you'll be able to avoid those kind of rookie mistakes and not be embarrassing for clients. Real-world workflow. So here's roughly what you want to do. Here's what the real-world kind of two-stage workflow looks like. You push your code. It auto-deploys to staging. It gets reviewed and approved. That could be by you, it could be by the client, could be by the internal team, and then it ends up going to production. Now, for not-profit or large organizations, in my not-for-profit work, I only own that first half. So I pushed to a staging, or I think it was called development server, and their internal IT team. They then ran all the compliance checks, and they handled the final push to live. I don't know what they did that way. We didn't really talk about that, but they were happy handling that process. They had, steps in place to do that. And the separation of duties, it was intentional because they wanted full control over what reaches production, and that's totally fine, and it makes sense to me. Smaller freelance projects for smaller jobs where I handle both staging and live. I usually work on a staging branch. So that branch auto deploys to my staging server. So that's what I'd set up initially in the workflow. And when the client signs off, then I merge that staging branch into the main branch and then push or commit. And then that then will deploy that on the live production website. So same pipeline idea, but just without the internal IT handoff. So again, 2 branches, 2 different workflows, same thing that we're doing basically, maybe a few steps like minifies stuff on there when you're deploying it to when you're deploying it to the live site, but you know that's the way that I operate. Steph, I'll talk about that in a second. Why staging first matters, and the point is that you have the same in both cases. So staging servers, staging first introduces risk. You are never pushing untried, tested straight to production. I know people do that, and it's a risk. And maybe if a client is okay with that, that's fine. But when you're working with people, businesses with real money, then I think that's unacceptable. You should be doing a staging or dev server first, test, accept, and then deploy. Bonus, time savings, it saves time, obviously. We've talked about that quite a bit, but by catching issues in staging, you avoid that kind of rework and rollbacks on live, which is always messy, stressful, and could end up losing the project. Key takeaway from this is that whether it's you or the client who owns production, staging first workflow looks professional, it reduces risk, and saves everyone a big headache. Okay, so scaling up. There are other things that we can add in to make this automation bigger for working with bigger teams or an agency, for example. So in agencies, talking about them, they tend to run larger teams. So nobody pushes straight to the main branch. You kind of work in feature branches, open a pull request, and a GitHub action runs that check before the code can be merged. And that just ensures quality, it stops broken code, hitting the staging or production for those. So generally, agencies lean on PR, pull request checks, just to keep for the high quality. For freelancers, you might not use them every day, you might even need to use them, but it's good to know that they exist. It's the same foundation, it's just more structured in the way that you're delivering. Rather than delivering everything, you're delivering bits, and then the team that will look after that bit, review the bit, before it's merged into the kind of the main or development branch for that. So if your goal is to work with agencies, it's probably a good idea just to practice with pull requests to make sure you've got a handle on that. Staging pipelines, so we brushed on that just last slide. So instead of using just one staging site, bigger teams often have multiple environments. So they could have a whole development environment, they could have a staging environment, you could have a UAT or user acceptance testing site, and then the live production one. And so GitHub Actions, they can handle deployment to each stage automatically as the code kind of moves through that workflow. So again, that's just kind of scaling up automation, same rough thing, but just making it bigger, more scalable for what the kind of more bigger orgs or enterprise have. Docker and Composer for teams running or building more complex stuff. WordPress stacks, think of the Bedrock framework. I think that uses Docker to spin up an environment. You might use Composer for PHP dependencies or Docker for local dev. GitHub Actions, they can build all these environments and they can check out all that stuff before deploying. So those are kind of bigger type, maybe agency, enterprise style workflows where you're spinning up a virtual container which matches whatever environment they have around there. So you're kind of really testing for those specifics. Yeah, GitHub Actions can handle all that. The big picture takeaway is that the cool thing is that the same tool scales. So if you start to use GitHub Actions just in the freelancer context, it scales up nicely to agencies and enterprises if that's the route you want to go down. The YAML that you write today for your plugin can grow into a pipeline that powers enterprise builds tomorrow. It's the same stuff, the same concept. and you don't have to relearn everything to kind of if you want to level up into those particular areas. Pull requests, if you don't know what they are, a pull request or PR is a developer process for merging code from one branch into another, usually into kind of main or develop or staging for those, but it could be broken down into smaller features. It's a chance for you to kind of, for the team to review changes before they're accepted and kind of merge into the bigger feature set. So it'd be a good idea if you get your head around PR. Why that matters for this is that bigger teams, a PR often triggers automatic checks. GitHub Actions run tests, LinkedIn stuff deploy to a preview or staging environment. That way, the kind of code is broken down and never reaches your staging in production, and it goes to the particular teams that are kind of working with that specific thing. So it could be a compliance team, or it could be a team that's just in charge of this one particular feature that's part of the overall big setup. Okay, I did start using GitHub Actions, but I kind of moved over to Bitbucket for a while. So I focused today on GitHub Actions so far, but it's not the only game in town. Bitbucket has its own CI/CD tool called pipelines. So they're a little bit different, but it's good to understand, you know, the same things out there, they're a little bit different, what is out there and what you want to use. So GitHub Actions is deeply tied into the whole GitHub ecosphere. Its biggest strength is the marketplace. So you've got thousands of pre-built actions for things like SFTP deploy and linting and whatever other stuff you need, Slack notifications, ClickUp, Notion, all that sort of stuff. So you can assemble workflows really, really quickly without reinventing the wheel. The free plan for GitHub is very generous. It's got 2,000 minutes a month, which is plenty for most freelancers. And if your repos are already on GitHub, then Actions is usually kind of your obvious choice. That's what you want to go there. Bitbucket, so Atlassian. Bitbucket's killer feature is the free unlimited private repos. So with GitHub, you obviously got your free public ones, but if you're working with clients, then you know they probably don't want their stuff out there to be seen by the public. So you go with a private repo, which in GitHub you can pay, and Bitbucket you don't. Obviously some restrictions, but in general for working with small freelance, single businesses, that's usually just fine with them. So again, Bitbucket's killer feature, free unlimited private repos. Pipelines itself is a little bit simpler, then it's a little bit more lightweight and integrates neatly with Jira and Atlassian stuff. So if you're already using that Atlassian stuff, then Bitbucket is probably the way to go. And you know, if you learn pipelines, it should be all right. The trade-off is fewer actions, less documentation for the stuff, and the free stuff itself for build minutes. I think is I was going to say it's tighter than Bitbucket. It's actually only 50 minutes per month on Bitbucket, which, you know, if you're on a bigger project, you might hit into some sort of limit. But in general, I've never come across an issue with using that. So both tools, they do the job. The right choice usually depends on where your code already lives, or if you're in a particular ecosphere. So if you're in GitHub, if you're used to contributing to open source public repos, stuff like that, then you probably want to just slide into GitHub Actions. If you're in the kind of Atlassian, or you like that, your free private repos, and Bitbucket pipelines might be the way to go. Cameron's said in the chat you can have free private repos on GitHub. I did not know that. That's great. I'll have to have a look into that. I've been Bitbucket for years and years and years. So when you choose which, GitHub, freelancer, solo workflows, public community resources. Obviously, Cameron's saying you've got free ones now, so if your client's already using that, probably go with GitHub Actions. Bitbucket is more your private small orgs, or if you're in the kind of the Jira Atlassian tool set, then you might want to learn pipelines for those. There's really no wrong answer. Use whatever fits your workflow. I use both, depending on the project and the client. And it works for me. They're not 100% polar shifts. They're roughly the same thing. So if you skill up on one, then you'll be able to slip into the other really, really easy. Here is a screenshot. It's not a WordPress build. I didn't have any on hand, so I've been using pipelines for a bit. So here's what you'll see roughly in GitHub. So once you make a push to a repo, then it will run up the automator, it'll start running the tasks, and you basically get a checklist of what's happened. You'll get a green tick for something that's correct. You'll get a red cross for something that's failed or a problem, and then there's a little twisty, and you can basically see what it failed on. So yeah, that's your idea. You do something, you push it up to the repo, you go and have a look on GitHub and see what's happening, how it's passed. You want to make sure you've got green ticks all the way down there, and then that means that your code's deployed, everything's passed, and you can then go back to the client and say, okay, ready for testing. Yeah, so it's clear, it's logged, it saves you the guesswork, which is great. So I usually have like a window open for Bitbucket with the CI stuff, and just keep an eye on that one of the monitors, make sure it's got the green ticks, and yeah, if you get green cross, it's like, what happened? But then gives you a chance to go in, test, and deploy, and the client never sees that stuff. So here's a bit of a recap. Minor deploys waste time, cause errors. You're zipping FTP and all that sort of rubbish, hate stuff. CI, CD is repeatable, it's safer. Consistency is a real winner here. Start small, so just use it to use SFTP, store your secrets in the vault there. Staging first reduces risk because you're deploying to not live, which is always a good thing. Gives you a chance to review stuff, your client to review stuff before it goes onto production. And it really does build client trust and saves a lot of time for everyone, I think. So stop dragging files, start pushing confidence with your builds. And that's what CI/CD is really all about. Steph, you had a question about page builders. Let me just go into the question. I'll talk about that in a second, but I got a little freebie for everyone. These slides will go up on the meetup page. So you'll have that QR code available anyway. But I've done a GitHub Actions quick guide. It's maybe about 10 or 12 pages, I think, maybe a bit less. It just takes you through what I've been talking about tonight in meetup. I'll show you the code and how it all works. And again, those kind of common gotchas there. So if you want to grab that, that's fine. I'll send a link out with the meetup, so you've got that link anyway later on. Screenshot. These slides will be available on meetup. And then you can take a screenshot of that. Yeah, so I'll post the slide show directly on the meetup page for tonight, so you'll have access to all these slides. That's me. If you want to connect with me, a few places. I'm mostly on LinkedIn these days, so that's probably a good place to connect with me. Right, let's get to some questions. Right, let's do Steph's first. Dimitri, I'll do Steph one first. He said about Elementor, was it? Yes, how about page builders? That's it. So for Elementor heavy projects, CI, CD, it's still useful for the code layer. So if you're doing child themes, custom widgets, assets, so stuff outside the theme, like plugins that complement stuff. But again, for page builders, Elementor, all of them, Divi, whichever one, Oxygen you're using, the content mostly lives in the database. And WordPress doesn't play nicely with database merges, as we've talked before. So if you are using a page builder, then you're really relying on the staging tools from your host, like the manual review. So CI/CD, it's not wasted time. It just solves a certain part of the workflow puzzle. So you can't rely on CI/CD for designing theme elements if you're dragging and dropping pages and stuff with Elementor. It only really works on code-based projects, and its stuff isn't stored in the database. So yeah, unfortunately, not at the moment. I'll get rid of the screen share. Stop that. There we go. A couple of questions. Dimitri said, do you have any tips for a deployment flow for a simple project using Elementor? Yeah, I think I just answered that. When you're using page builders, it's storing stuff in the database. So you can't merge databases between different environments. It's not possible. People have tried. I think it was Delicious Brains, if I think about that, maybe 5-6 years ago, probably more actually. They tried to have a tool that merged databases, but they ended up storing more information than the actual change itself to try and merge the two. So yeah, it's not really possible using MariaDB or MySQLDB, unfortunately. Just wrong database architecture for that type of sync. Knowing too little to ask, and you can ask anything. I don't mind. No, I don't think everyone's at different stages. Die. So you'll get beginners, you get people who've been there for years. There's no wrong questions and no silly questions. Oh yeah, Cameron says it was those brains. MergeBot. That's right. Everyone got super excited with that solution, but no, it didn't work. So yeah, they can't solve it. No one can, because they are the people who do the WordPress DB migration tool. Okay. Any other questions? Pop them in chat or unmute yourself. Otherwise, what time is it? It's 7 o'clock. That's pretty well timed. Talked fast too. And I know there's a few people on here because it's a very developer-y type of topic, but I like to put development topics in there sometimes.
Off-topic question, but are you going to enqueue?
Yes.
Lovely. I'll see you there.
Not the web directions, but the enqueue.
Just the WordPress one.
Yeah. So if those of you don't know, there's a WordPress conference in Sydney called WPSyd. I think it's just called enqueue, actually, isn't it? Yeah, one day, lots of talks. Someone here might be presenting. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that because there's no big WordPress. The meetups are kind of closing down, and there's no big WordCamp planned yet for then, and this will be like a good end to the year. So if you haven't got the ticket, then yeah, go. It'll be good. A good day. You're welcome, Michelle. Okay, no more questions coming in. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining me tonight. Hopefully it's opened your eyes a little bit to some automation. And next month, I say, what am I talking about next month? Oh yes, MCP servers, AI and MCP servers. So if that's of interest, then join me same place, same location, online next month, and that'll be the last one for the year. So take care, everyone. Thanks very much for your time, and speak to you next month, hopefully. Bye, everyone.